Okay, folks, I think we'll get started. Apologies for the overkill with the microphone, but we have some live streamers in, so that's why we need this. So welcome. This is the second Health and Phys Ed seminar of the year, proudly hosted by Monash University Faculty of Education and HPE Victoria. So I'm Laura Alfrey. I'm the courses leader for Health and Phys Ed here at Monash Uni. And Bernie is Professional Learning Manager at HPE. Bernie's going to be leading the show today. He's going to be sharing his expertise on using a theme-based approach to structuring curriculum in Health and Phys Ed. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the people of the Kulin Nation. As an immigrant, it's been a rare opportunity for me to better understand Australian culture and knowledge and practices. So I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So, warm and jekka to everybody here. We've got people in the room as well as live streamers and people who'll be listening to the recording at a later time. So welcome everybody. In terms of our plan for this evening, I'm going to start by just creating a bit of a context, and then I'll hand over to Bernie, who's going to work through these following points. He'll provide an overview of a themes-based approach, how it links to the Victorian curriculum for HPE. He'll share some examples in practice and what that can look like. He'll also give us some tools to help us interpret the content descriptions and elaborations that link to this project, and then also some tools that'll help us do some planning. Okay, so that's the plan of attack. In terms of setting the context, Phys Ed programmes are generally characterised by a suite of units that focus on sports individually one at a time. Okay, so we'll have a unit on tennis, then a unit on footy, and then a unit on netball. But with an increasingly crowded curriculum, okay, this poses some challenges for us. It means that we need to be a bit more creative in terms of teaching everything we need to teach. Okay, so we've got a list of achievement standards as long as our legs. And in order to make sure we provide our students the opportunity to attain all of those, we need to think out of the box sometimes. So what Bernie's going to do today is show some tools and tips and tricks that will help us to do that. Okay, so that's the context we're working in. And Bernie, over to you.
Thanks, Laura. And just by way of background, and thank you everyone for coming along this evening, and to those of you who are online. I believe I saw Samantha Downward in there, one of my former students at RMIT. So welcome, Samantha. You will be receiving an email soon about presenting at the end of year conference. But yeah, by way of background, I spent best part of, or maybe the worst part of, no, the best part of 20 years involved in the tertiary sector at RMIT, training teachers. I've been last 7 years I've been with HPE Victoria, where my role is to provide the professional learning program, run conferences, workshops, but also interact with a lot of teachers on a daily basis. And I think sometimes we make it a little bit more difficult for ourselves in the way we structure our curriculum by the decisions we do or don't make. And I've actually reversed this presentation from ways I've done parts of it in the past. So the very last part we'll get to is what I often start with in terms of thinking about our planning, but I'll place the seed now that if you could only teach one or two things in a semester, what would they be? If you could only teach a couple of things, what would they be? If you could only teach two or three in the primary sector, any primary people in here? One that's good. Any others? Oh, a few. Good. Secondary? Good. In between? So we've got a few, I don't know if you've got a few primary and a few secondary, but if, for example, you could only teach 2 or 3 fundamental movement skills, what might they be? And I'll come back to that. Is it realistic, because I hear teachers tell me this, is it realistic that we can teach a sport in 5 weeks. Because some teachers tell me it is, and some I question that, and I'll use some examples with that. I love this as I can see. These rooms are awesome, aren't they? That what we're going to look at in terms of themes in teaching is trying to integrate areas, how we can organise our units of work, and hopefully these slides will be made available afterwards. More than happy for them to be. So that we might look at a theme in what we're doing rather than just single units or single focuses. And while it can describe a content and a pedagogy of how we teach, I'm going to be mainly focusing on the content. When you get further along, you might think, oh, this is game sense or this is this. And I'm going to say, no, I'm just going to focus mainly on the content from the understanding that content can be taught through different ways. So my focus is mainly on the content. Okay, a really awesome textbook is one by George Graham and others, and again I can include the full reference to that, which does address a number of chapters around skill themes and movement concepts. I'd also like to add, that this is a term that we sort of coined, I noticed this one went missing, at RMIT when I was teaching there back in the mid to late 90s. We used to have our students do a themed unit just on what we call propulsion skills, kicking, throwing, and how they link into everything. And I've got a couple of examples later on of how we show that. Another theme just on locomotion. How does our locomotion skills affect our teaching and learning? And how are they affected when they're combined with other skills? So those of you who are teaching might look at kids run, and they can run, and you look at them jump, they can jump, but they can't combine the two. And maybe they haven't had enough opportunities to learn those. I often ask teachers, what locomotion skill, for example, in theming, must you be able to do to kick a ball? And they always come up, the run, but often don't identify that we also need to be able to have a good leap. So we have to be able to leap into the ball before we can kick it. So we're looking at how do we then link skills together and what are their applications. Who's your principal? Say hello to Dean for me, will you? I heard he was principal out there. He's a good phys ed from RMIT, I do recall. Good. Sorry? Oh, there's Monesh too, but no, Dean's a good man. I just heard about him the other day. Okay, most of what I'm going to be looking at, obviously, will link to the movement and physical activity strand. If we had time, we could move over into other strands and how they interact, but we only have 3 hours tonight. Sorry, 60 minutes. And we'll look at skill or movement themes, linking sport and game concepts, and look at how we could potentially structure our curriculum programs. And I've stolen a couple of program designs from teachers. That's their curriculum. They're not my curriculums, but their curriculums. So one of the things which I think is important, which relates to this, is while you, in some of the definitions and some of the writing, you'll see FMS or fundamental motor skills mentioned, you might see a sport name. If we actually look at the content descriptions, it doesn't mention teaching specific fundamental movement skills, sports or games. It does not mention those. And so what we might be able to do is think about how we teach or structure our curriculum in a more creative way than potentially, as Laura said, just linking in individual sports. I may have mentioned too, please ask questions as we go. If it's one I can't answer, then I won't answer it. But no, it'd be good to have those. And so one of the challenges we need to have is how do we think about fundamental movement skills, sport-specific skills or game-specific skills, tactics and sports that we teach? And is it possible to teach or learn all of the content that we think we're teaching? So maybe I use one example and then I'll probably come back to it again. But if we think of a sport like basketball, how many, and we've got 4 weeks, what would we like to teach if we were teaching basketball? Dribbling. Shooting. Passing. Catching. If you pass it, you want them to catch. Sorry, I'm repeating. Some sort of defensive strategy, some sorts of offensive strategy. Understand? Rebounding. What skills are involved in rebounding? Jumping, catching, landing. So again, we've got to make sure we've got those. And if we have 4 weeks, we actually, as I mentioned at the end, we may not actually have 4 weeks, we may have 4 hours. And can we teach all of those things in 4 hours? I'm looking at this no, and again, I'll use another example later. What's an offensive strategy that you might teach? Spacing, okay? What other sports have that? Netball, any invasion game. Netball for the netball, water polo, lacrosse, hockey. I was leading a workshop last year where I used that example, and virtually everyone in the room, in the outdoor space, was teaching by individual sports and weren't explicitly connecting the similarities between those sports. So that's what we're meaning here with teaching and learning that content, and I'm going to, again, build on that. So I really want to be encouraging moving beyond teaching skills, games and sports in isolation. So if we look at the curriculum, and we can see that I've just highlighted levels 5, 6 through to 9, 10, some of the content descriptions that would relate to the teaching of motor skills and sports. And towards the end, I'm going to break them down and hopefully see how we can look at them a little bit in a little more simple way. But we can, the ones that are circled, I can't see a sport or an FMS or a sport-specific skill mentioned. But what I can see is moving into space as a concept and strategy. And towards the end, I'm going to break down, show an example of how we've interpreted the content descriptions. Just by way of that, have any of you seen the movement and physical activity charts and personal, social and community health charts we've developed? 1, 2, 3. Okay, that might... When I showed them to a group of teachers at a FMS and Game Sense workshop in March, they just go, I didn't realise it could be done this, could be interpreted this way, and it made sense to them. So hopefully I'm leaving that to the end so that you hang around. Anyone that cuts off online, we won't send it to them. Okay, so do we look at our structure as theme-based, as multi-sport, or a combination? And in the examples I'll show you, you'll see there's a bit of both. And we need to consider how the content is presented. Can moving away from teaching a specific skill or sport actually give you greater freedom? And I'll use as I work through, use some examples. So the comment over here was, any invasion game category. I think we're going to have to start to use that term a little bit differently. We need someone to come up with a better term than invasion games or territorial games, just because when we're doing some work in a school out in Broadmeadows, we couldn't use those terms because many kids came from schools came from cultures where they had experienced things which obviously weren't positive in that way. So best prize for someone who can come up with a name that represents that category. But how many of you in here have seen this way of structuring curriculums? I'd hope that a handful, which I find interesting because this way of structuring has been around for quite a while. But last week when I was leading a presentation at ACU for some of their master's students, there was about 25 or so students in there, all of them within probably 3 to 6 years out of high school. And again, one of that group, when we worked through this, had been in a school where they were taught using an invasion or categorical or theme-based sort of approach. So we tend to structure our curriculum around categories. So we've got the invasion, net wall, striking, fielding, and target. And then we might, within those, identify specific components that we want to work on. So I might decide, okay, when I'm in attack in the invasion games, we invade an opponent's area to score a goal. That's the basic premise of every one of those games. And defence, we might want to block up space. So the first thing we teach in most any of those games to beginners would stand between your player and the goal. When you become more experienced and a better player, you can read, this person always goes to the left, so I'll orientate myself there. But initially, for your beginners, you would go, let's just stand between the person and the goal. With the exception of rugby, because then you'll be offside. But when I've been talking to teachers, when they're using a multi-sport, some do, but many of them, they teach that concept in every one of those games and sports and don't necessarily explicitly link those ideas for kids. I ran a workshop out in the Greensboro area last year with a group of secondary teachers, and it was a bit of a light bulb where I said, well, do you explicitly tell the kids when you've done netball that we're doing a very similar concept in hockey? And it was, no, we don't. And I understand that in some schools you won't have the opportunity to be inside for 6 weeks. You get 3 weeks on this court, then 3 weeks in this oval space and 3 weeks in another. So you may not be able to, for example, do 6 weeks of indoor court games, but you can still join the dots with the concepts. This is, I can give I think the term that's used now, a shout out to Gleneagles Secondary College over in the Rowville way. This is, the top bit was their grade 7 curriculum a few years ago. The bottom bit is what we've moved it to. Content's very similar. So if we look at the green, term 1, 2 weeks of minor games, which were primarily around invasion sort of tag games. 6 weeks in term 2 of hockey, soccer, then 3 weeks of AFL, 3 weeks of netball, term 4, 3 weeks of basketball. We then just restructured those to 2 lots of 5-week sessions around invasion games. And then we looked at some of the other, invasion games field, invasion games court. And I've got some comments from their teachers in a little while in terms of what they found. So the actual time spent isn't that different. It's just how they thought about structuring their curriculum. This is an example from Kirsten Smith in Mernda and Annie Kay, one of our staff members, working together, where they've got, particularly as they move up the grades, they're looking at different ways of theming their strike fielding, modified games in grade 3, intro to gym, more striking and fielding, netball games. Obviously, this is in one of their terms, but there you don't necessarily see a sport. So I could look at the striking fielding and go, well, with this group of kids, I want to spend a bit of time just on getting used to striking an object in a netball game. And if I was to ask you, look at some of the netball games or court we might play there, we might be doing bat tennis. We might do a bit of badminton. We might do a bit of hot shots tennis. We might do a bit of down ball. We might even do a bit of table tennis. We could do a bit of squash just by using a wall. If I was teaching those, if I was teaching those sports as a group, what might be the first thing or one thing that's common to all of those sports with beginners after they hit the ball or object? It might be a balloon. Do we encourage?
Moving into the right.
Yeah, moving into space. We tend to, with beginners, and encourage them after they hit the ball, move back to the centre start spot. On a tennis court in the tee, in a down ball court, you move out your down ball, you just move back into the down ball area. So you move back in, and that's a concept that goes across all of those. Because how many of you, when you've had a sport and you say to the kids, we got 5 weeks of this, and you got some kids go, awesome. Other kids go, don't really want to do 5 weeks of that. But if they know they're rotating through different activities, then there's a greater likelihood that you'll be able to maintain their interest. Again, this one here is from Ray Breed at St Leonard's. He's now left St Leonard's, but this was his curriculum last year, where again, and while you see athletics, he didn't necessarily teach athletics in a traditional way. He might teach running events and teach concepts related to running, teach throwing events and concepts related to throwing. But very much he had from a 5-6 to year 10, very much a focus on teaching through themes or teaching through categories. And he would say, and if he was here, he'd say the same thing. He'd go, in my invasion sports, I've probably got 4 or 5 games I use. I just change the ball, change the size of the field, change the number of players playing the same game. And so he's not having to reteach different games in sport-specific areas. And again, here's other terms in that. Yeah. Going back to the Glen Eagles teachers. Is it 20 minutes yet? Good. Going back to the Glen Eagles teachers. This was their response when they went to a more of a themed approach. Increased participation. It was easier to differentiate students because they had different activities going on. They could see them in different activities. Increased enjoyment. After the first few weeks, and in some cases months, of the kids, can't we play the game? They actually realised they were touching the ball more. And the kids who were and how many of you have kids who always, can't we play the game? A lot. Are they the kids who are really good at playing the game? Or are they the other kids?
Those that are really good at it.
Those who are really good at playing the game want to play the game. Can't we do that running again? Because I'm really good at it. Can we play... Oh, no, I won't go to that game. Never want to play dodgeball, but can we play dodgeball? Who are the good kids? The kids who are good at throwing. So once they've moved to this, Roxanne Bell, the team leader out there, just said, sorry, Roxanne, but she's awesome. Roxanne Bell, the team leader out there, said after a few weeks, the kids they got more excited because they're coming down to a lesson where they knew they were going to be doing something that was going to be of greater interest rather than 5 weeks of a sport they may or may not have wanted to engage in. They also found that they had greater consistency in their teaching because it got the teachers thinking more about the outcome. They weren't forced to play a sport or do a sport, but they had a choice of, okay, today I'm going to use these games and I think I'll bring in an AFL ball and a netball rather than a soccer ball and a basketball. So but they were still working on a similar concept. They had found they had more meaning and purpose. What they were doing is rather than teaching, going back to the earlier example, rather than teaching basketball, they were actually teaching moving into space. Full stop. They were teaching how to receive a ball. It changed. The way of receiving might change with the type of ball, but they were working on how to receive a ball and how to propel a ball. With that, they found they were able to give good feedback because they were just looking at, not trying to teach the whole sport, looking at how's that kid moving into space. They had also developed some rubrics along with that, and Roxanne shared that at a number of workshops, but they had some real clear clarity of outcomes, and they were able to develop some stronger links, and I'll show you some of the examples which I shared with them, which helped them make those links. Just read through these, and I want you to think what grade these students were. While you're thinking, I reckon I've been standing. Why don't you just stand up? Just stand up, look across at someone. Okay, you don't have to say hello, but you can. Just look across at them. One of you get ready to throw a ball. The other one, get ready to catch it. Okay, Laura, so you throw a ball to me. And then throw it back, okay? Just do a few of those. Pick your favourite type of ball. It might be a handball. At home, you can do the same thing. At home, you can do the same thing. Okay, in the back there, can you catch this one? No, good, thank you. Okay, let's sit down. Or if you don't have to sit down, if you want to get out of the way and just stand at the side, that's good too. But, 20 minutes of me is enough. And I think we really need to always just re-alert ourselves at times so that you feel a little bit more alert now, a little bit more awake. It's been a long day for some of you. I was up at 5:30, so yeah, it's been a long day. So what grade do you think these students were? Got a year 8 over here. Anyone want to go higher?
9.
A 9. Yeah, you can. Anyone want to go lower?
7.
7. These were grade 3 to 6 students from Calinda Primary School in North Ringwood. One of our staff members, Annie Kay, has been doing an absolutely awesome job at working with that school. We've been working with them in developing a theme-based approach in their primary school curriculum. And when we surveyed the kids, because they'd had it repeated to them and they've done a couple of modules on it, and these kids, grade 5, 6 kids, first time through, when are we going to play the game? These were verbatim comments from those kids. So they are getting why we're teaching theme-based. Interesting to see how many sports have things in common. Imagine if you had those kids coming into Elizabeth Murdoch in grade 7, what you could do with them. They already see that. And one of the things that was vital for these kids, for a little bit of a tangent, is we know the data tells us by about age 11 or 12, a lot of kids are dropping out of a sport, but they're ready to drop into something else. So if we're actually teaching kids who may not say, no, I don't want to play footy anymore, I want to play football, as in AFL to soccer, they go, I understand, I've got concepts that transfer to that. And the kids have a better understanding. Didn't realise sports had skills and game strategies in common. And these were, like I said, grade 3 to 6 kids at a primary school after 2 years of having a theme-based approach. The lowest we got to was grade 7. So imagine what you could be doing with your grade 7, 8, 9 kids if you're starting to access or to teach where, and even if you're teaching with multi-sports, linking the concepts between the sports. Got to give me another 20-minute warning. Okay, I'm just going to go to, I'm not sure if you're aware, if you're not, I'd suggest you log on to it, but where's this guy we go? How many of you get our tip of the week? Oh, you silly people. Okay, you can sign up with us, but each week, there's 5 people in here who get it. Hopefully some at home do as well, or wherever you are. It is shown at Gold Class at Crown this evening, this session. If you believe that, I saw someone go, what? Okay, each week we put out a tip around teaching, and they're a shorter sort of 2 to 3 page. So a couple of weeks ago, we put out one revisiting a thematic approach using a net wall example, and we talked about it and then just talked a little bit about there's an example on the table, and then a couple of activities why you should have it. These were comments out of that I put in here that were out of there. So if you had read the tip of the week, you'd already know that they were grade 3 to 6 students, Laura. So yeah, and then there's just a couple of games there which you could use and apply at different levels. So I'd suggest if you don't, you could contact HPE Victoria and sign up for that tip of the week. There's another couple in there related to that. So this one here, is that one? No. So it's, yeah, here's another way of looking at it. So it's the first one I wanted to look at, highlighted. highlighted how you can look at the vertical jump from introduction to application. So if we go through that, here you can see that, okay, at foundation to year 2, we're just going to focus on components of the jump, getting them to understand the purpose, vertical jump with control, start to combine with other locomotor movements, etc. Then over on the example activities, questions. I'm sure some of you who are primary teachers have done this. Can you jump quietly, loudly? Arms go straight up, up or out when you're side jumping in different directions. And then we gave some other examples. So then, all the way down to we're looking at, I won't go through all of it, but we're looking down at the high year levels, year 7 to 10, perform and refine movement skills. Again, student knowledge and understanding an important outcome, performing controlled sequences, I'm over on the left. Purpose application, jumping combined with running, leaping, just twisting. Go to the third one, focus on peer observation to help improve performance in sport-specific contexts. For example, jumping to catch in netball, rebounding in basketball, spike in volleyball, jumping to defend a soccer goalie kick this. And then some example questions. So types of things that you might consider. So if you don't, I would encourage you, if you're teaching PE at any level, to sign up for these. We send them out, you can guess, every week. The one next week is actually on teaching English as an additional language, where we've engaged with a couple of teachers who work in very culturally diverse schools to some ideas around that. So yeah, it's a free resource that you can access if you want to. I'll go sideways a bit. Why would we teach the catch? And one of the questions, when we come back to prioritising a curriculum, and again, I'll come back to this at the end, one of the challenges we have, I think I'd be correct to say, we don't have enough time to teach everything we'd like to teach. And one of the questions which I encourage people to think about is, are all skills and concepts created equal? And I've copped a bit of flack from some people for this, but I don't know. At my age, it doesn't really matter. But when I've asked teachers the question of, are all skills created equal? And I use the example of the kick, and I use the example of the kick because I used to play football or soccer, so I can defend that, and the catch. And I ask how many activities through adolescence and adult involve the kick. Generally, we come up with a few. Football or soccer, indoor football, 7-a-side football, then a couple of positions in a sport like rugby and gridiron. There's not many other sports that use the kick. I wouldn't not use the kick or teach it, but if we're looking at longevity and long-term participation, there are not a lot of activities that involve the kick. If we look at the catch, these are just a sample of some of the activities that involve the catch. So if we are having to prioritise decisions about what we teach, and to some this is a bit of heresy, but if we do need to prioritise some of the decisions we teach, we might look at it this way. Because if you can't catch, the reason I've got things like hockey, volleyball, tennis and squash, if you can't catch a ball, you're going to really struggle in those because of the elements of the catch, of moving into position, observing, getting ready to catch, are very similar to some of the striking activities where we watch the ball, move into position, get ready to strike. So there's some common elements there. So you might have a challenge in teaching that. And again, I wouldn't necessarily say you teach all of these. I just wanted to highlight the similarity or the number of things around the catch. So one of the things, if we're looking at it thematically, and this was in a recent tip of the week, We might say, okay, F to 2, foundation to 2, our key focus in our teaching might be on specific components, focusing on the concepts of receiving and passing. You can still do some receiving and passing and moving games. Playing minor games, gates, captain ball, a few other activities and games. Then at grades 3 to 6, we're looking at, okay, let's refine the components, continue to refine the components, and start to do sports-specific skill applications. So we might start to involve a mitt in the game of softball. Or we combine dribbling, passing, and then catching. So we're starting to combine some elements. My observation, while lots of kids don't have what would be termed fully mature components, my observation is most kids, and a mate and I, Jeff Walkley and I, were original authors of one of the fundamental movement skills manuals here in Victoria. My observation, if the kids have all the components minus a couple, they can usually go into some sort of game with a degree of success. Won't be perfect, but they might hug the ball, have the hands in the wrong position, but they can play in games. So we can then link the refining components with moving into space, linking it to propulsion. This is obviously a right-handed one. Just want to get it out of the way. Good. Linked into propulsion, so after the kids receive it, they have to do something with it. If you're playing netball, what's the rules around netball? How long do you have to get rid of it? 3 seconds. At this grade, we might give them 4 or 5. When you catch or mark the ball in football, how long do you have to get rid of it? Yeah. It sort of depends. If you catch it from a handball, you've got to get rid of it straight away. If you mark it, you've got a period of time. But we can start to associate some of those key rules with kids. And those kids at Clinda from grade 3 to 6, they understood and were taught some of the rules around those different sports. And it was relevant because they would do on one part of the court, they might be playing AFL. Right next to it, they're playing netball, so we could make a direct comparison about the rules. And you know that in your class, you'll have a kid who'll be able to help you with that. So looking at opponents, what are the impacts of rules? And there we're starting to look at how does the catch tie into games like netball, basketball, and some of the striking sports. Because again, we could do some striking activities along with some invasion activities and have similar concepts. We had one unit there at Clinda where we did, may not make sense, cricket, tennis and badminton together. The concept we were working on was hitting into space. In all of those activities, you try to hit into space away from your opponent on the other side of the net or from a fielder. And we just reinforce that concept. Then years 7 to 10, again, we just move up a level. Sport-specific application or activity-specific application. I'm using sport loosely. I'm just saying I could be playing that as a recreational activity, not just as a competitive sport, but we're looking at skill combinations, things like catching at the highest point. What sport's that important in? AFL, basketball, cricket, if the ball's up high. So yeah, that's an important concept for kids to understand. You go back tomorrow with your kids and watch them catch and try to encourage them to lob it up to catch it at the highest point. And you'll see kids who jump, then land and catch it. You'll see kids who jump and catch it here, and you'll see kids who'll jump, concentrating on it, and will hit them. And they won't catch it. And we know that. So that's just one concept that we could be working on, which is important in some situations. Again, decision-making requirements of sport, we compare those. So that netball AFL example, depending on the situation, netball, I've got 3 seconds. and they've got all these decisions to make. AFL, I've got little time, or maybe 5 or 10 seconds. So that they, and what impact does that have? And again, we've got a whole range of sports in which can be applied. So can you see how we are sort of thematically building skills and concepts from foundations through to year 10? At this point, any questions, please? Any questions from anyone online? You're doing well.
At our school, we tend to just look at the rule of threes. So when we're playing an invasion game, we tend to say rule of threes. So we've got 3 seconds with the ball. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
At our school, we just, when we play invasion games or throwing and catching games, for the lack of a better word, we sort of look at the rule of threes. So, 3 seconds with the ball, 3 steps, and 3 passes before you can score. And kids generally get that. And when we say...
What grade is that at?
7 to 10.
Okay.
Mainly 7, 8. But, yeah, we say rule of threes, and rather than saying, OK, you've got 3 seconds to do this, you've got 3 seconds to do this, we say rule of threes, and we put a visual cue up on the board for them, and they know that it's 3 steps, 3 passes, and 3 seconds. So
and then do you bring that down and apply the specific game rule when the kids have got that?
Yeah, well, once they've got that, I mean, we could, once it's probably 3 or 4 lessons later on, once they've sort of, when they can't run with the ball, where they have to stay with netball rules, we just say netball rules and they know.
Awesome.
How to play. So
that's this applied exactly. In fact, we're going to have a chat after and you're going to be doing a tip of the week on that. That just fits in perfectly.
Yep, no worries.
No, that's awesome. Thank you. One question online. Can we vet it first? If it's from Sam, it would be too difficult for me. Thank you.
This is from Margaret Burney. Any tips for casual day-to-day teachers who are handed a lesson plan to do, which could be anything? Like they're doing volleyball today, which I had the other day, and that's all they're supposed to do the whole session. What do you suggest maybe going a little bit feral and having another couple of options to run concurrently?
Okay, that, without wanting to be unkind, that question is a little bit outside the scope of what we're doing because that's also around your preparation. But if the teacher is aware of, okay, you think of volleyball, are there other sports or activities like that? Is there a concept in volleyball you might be wanting to develop? So, for example, you might be wanting to develop passing, using your 3 passes. And is there another netball sport where you do that? And you might say round net or spike ball might go into that, so you could do some passing activities. Or you might in volleyball say, okay, what we're trying to do is hit the ball away into open space, and then you could look at other netball sports where you hit away. Volleyball is a pretty unique sort of sport, but I would be going in, if you know you're teaching a category of sport, think about a like category and what's another game or activity you can use with that. I'm not sure if that gives an adequate answer or not, but thinking what's across that. And then on a different note, go back to their teacher and ask them to leave it a little bit clearer for the CRT. I'm not sure if that helps.
That works for Margaret.
Thank you. Thank you, Margaret. Okay, again, if we were teaching the catch, I'm going back those couple of slides, linked to a range of sports, we also have a whole bunch of concepts we could teach, depending on where your kids are. With many of them, and so your name in the back, that's that awesome question. Darren, he's with his 3-3-3, he might be focusing a bit on teamwork and moving into space and allowing 3 seconds for kids to move and 3 seconds for kids to make a decision about who to pass it to. But these are all things related to the catch that need to be understood in our teaching. So again, I've used the example I sort of mentioned before about decision-making requirements, and you can look at different sports and some have really complex decision-making requirements, and some have, with the catch, have relatively simple decision-making requirements for very high technique. So we could look at, again, AFL, and you've got a couple of seconds to get rid of it. Or basketball, you've got a few seconds, but you can dribble and shield yourself, but you're still under pressure to get rid of it. We can look at a sport like cricket, and if you catch the ball directly from the bat and the batsman's out, may have high technique but very simple decision. If I catch it, that's the end of the play. Or with cricket, again, relatively simple. If I'm fielding in a position and the ball comes to me, I may know that based on the position I'm fielding, it's highly unlikely the batsman is going to run if I field it. If they do run, I've got a choice of one or two ends. Not a difficult technique, relatively straightforward decision, as against AFL, or where after I catch it, I may have to pass it to one of 6, 7, 8 players who's shouting for it, and I've then got to make a decision: who do I pass it to? What sort of propulsion, handball, kick do I use to pass it? So we can look at that, and we can talk about that with the kids and take one of these concepts depending on where they are. But these are all what I think pretty basic concepts which you could build sequentially into your PE program and your theme-based units. Just looking at body positioning. How do we position our body to catch the ball in those different sports, or to strike it in the case of volleyball and tennis? How do we position our body? How do we position our body with opposition? Again, these are all parts of a theme-based unit which you can teach in an individual sport, or you can teach in a theme and by comparing what happens in different sports and different activities. If that makes sense to you. Just to show how long we've been doing this, again, I referred to a previous place of employment. We were teaching some of these concepts in theme-based units before, most of you are probably born, but in the late 90s. There was a cohort of students over about 5 or 6 years where we had time to teach all of these sorts of concepts and applying them to different teaching pedagogies. Just want to sort of change the tune a little bit and just show a couple of activities. So, for example, this activity here through to this activity here, there's about 100 in between, but this is going to be the focus of a workshop, a practical workshop I'm doing at a group of schools in the Millbrook, Croydon area in a couple of weeks. So this activity, pass to the open cone. It's around teaching kids to move into space and make decisions. But first I'd like to ask those of you in here, how many of you have observed your kids playing games and either they pass the ball and don't know where to move, or pass the ball and don't move, or catch the ball and then take a few seconds to pass it, and then a few seconds later they move? So in this activity you can see you've got student 1, 2, 3, 4 on different cones, and there's one open cone. The person, any one of the students can start with the ball. After they've passed it, they then just move to the open cone, which creates a new open cone. The person who receives the ball then passes it and moves to the new open cone, and it just continues. I guarantee if you go back and do this activity with your grade 7, 8 kids tomorrow, your name is? Mitch. Pick on Mitch. If Mitch goes back and does this with his grade 7, 8 kids tomorrow, if you start with netball, I guarantee most of your kids will be able to do this. They'll go, this is pretty easy. If you change it to non-dominant handball, do this tomorrow, Mitch, and then give me a call in the afternoon to tell me I'm right. After they're doing with a non-dominant hand, it will slow down. they will miss the player, and they will follow the handball to the person they're passing to, or they will have a pause compared to the netball. They will have a pause before they move. And what that's telling me is the kids that had the skill and the concept, we change the skill and suddenly the concept falls away, their capacity to do that moving into space. And in the primary space, you'll have some kids that don't have the skill, have never played an invasion game of sort and don't realise, oh, I have to move after I pass it. Every time I've done this, that is what I observe. And my question is, because I've seen it happen where teachers will teach this sort of activity and then go straight into a game, 5v5, 7v7, and they wonder why the kids can't be successful. Now, as a teacher, put you on the spot, Mitch. No, someone can help Mitch. After your kids can do this successfully, how could you make it more difficult? Defender. Yep, put a defender in the middle. Would you start the defender passive or active? A passive defender, so they've suddenly got an obstacle they need to pass around. What's another thing I could add in there?
Different shaped ball.
Different shaped ball. Yeah, we can change the ball.
Make the gates bigger.
Make the space bigger, which could make the passing easier, or make the space smaller. So we can start to play with this, but if you have kids with a ball that can't do this, I guarantee they're not even going to be able to play 3 against 1 keeping away. But we're starting to introduce a very basic concept, and then you can ask some questions about why do you want to maintain possession. Okay, move to the next slide. Does that make sense, this activity? Fairly basic one. I stole it off someone a few years ago, so now it's mine. This one I got out of a football book. Please stay with me with this. It's called 4 against 2 against 2 as an invasion game. And so if we look at the left-hand side, what we would do is we'd start with 4 players on both sides. You select a ball. Again, we'll go with a netball. So the 4 X1 to X4 with the black, they start passing the ball around. 2 of the players on the red team go over to try and get the ball. You might have a rule and decide, well, if it hits the ground, it's a turnover. If it goes out of space, it's a turnover. If it gets intercepted. When the turnover occurs, play stops, the ball goes over the other side, and to the red side, 2 of the defenders in black, or from the black team, go over to try and do the same thing. And so it's a very controlled invasion game where I'm deliberately putting the advantage to the passers, because again, my observation when I'm watching invasion games, until you've got 2 really good teams or equal teams, it's normally easier to break up possession than keep possession, to disrupt play than maintain play. So that's where I might start it. I generally have a rule of thumb that if the kids in any game that I play, if the kids are successful in invasion games at maintaining possession 0, 1 or 2 times out of 10, generally that's a cue to me it's too hard, or the teams are uneven, and I say I've got to change something. If they're at about 5, 6, 7, that's an okay level of challenge. If they're at 9 or 10, so they can maintain possessions continually, I'll go, okay, I've got to make it a little bit more challenging for them. And when we go back to the comment by the teachers of differentiation, I can say, well, on one court, I can have different levels of kids, if I want to, for some lessons, all playing the same game, adjusting the complexity to suit their skill level. So if we go back to this, if we're playing this and we can only get 2 passes in a row before it's disrupted, or there's a turnover, what can I do to make it easier to maintain possession? Take a defender away. So it becomes 4 against 1 against 3. What else could I do? Yep, so you got... Yep, so you have someone on the perimeter, on the outside, for them to pass to. So again, you've increased the number of players on the side with the ball, or you could place one of the players out there. So yeah, we've made an adjustment. What else could I do?
Make the field bigger.
Make the space bigger, give them more room to pass, assuming they can pass over bigger spaces or travel with the ball. It could be I was using the AFL ball or a soccer ball on the ground and they don't have the skill, but then that's not catching, but it's still an invasion game. And so I go, well, I'll go back to a sport or game they can use a little bit, where they have a better, they can control the ball easier. If they continually maintain possession, what can I do?
Make that, yeah, reverse.
Reverse it. So I say, okay, now send 3 over. And kids can self-regulate this. If you get 10 passes in a row, send another defender over. If you still get 10, send another one over. But then I don't need to play 4 against 2 against 2. I can actually, those kids are okay at 4 against 4. But it's a really easy way for me to monitor how successful the kids are with this. And I know I know a couple of teachers who use this as a base game in all of their invasion sports.
You make the ball bigger too. It's
Yep.
easier for the defender.
Make the ball bigger.
Make it smaller.
Make it smaller, give them lacrosse sticks, give them whatever, but as a base game. But all I'm doing is following the principle, if they're only successful 0, 1, 2 out of 10, it is too hard. At that middle bit, maintain it. At the higher end, let's adjust, let's keep it going. I'm sorry, make it easier. Again, this is, I've just given a couple of examples in here which when you get the notes you can look at and just decide for the sports you teach or may not teach or the games you teach, what are the similarities in skills? If a kid can't do a vertical jump in football, they're probably not going to be able to do it in basketball. Some kids can't move into space in one activity, they may or may not be able to in another. So I've just put a couple of worksheets, another one around tennis, badminton, some of the things there that you might focus on. Again, you could take this sort of a worksheet and just conceptually think about it that way. I would encourage you in your programs, identify a sport or theme you would teach in your program relative to that sport or theme. What are the key skills? What are the key sport-specific skills? Do your kids have them? So that would indicate where you need to start. What are the key game concepts or strategies? So again, invasion sports, initially creating space, defending space. Net wall, hitting away. Moving into a position to receive it. And then build on from that. So there's some fairly common themes or concepts that run through those sports. Okay. Best question. I've only had one so far. 2, sorry. One from online, but can't give this online, so it's too bad. But just wanted to highlight how we've interpreted the curriculum. I keep moving with this quickly. I've got an example up there from level 5 and 6, and if we go over to the right-hand side, propose and apply movement concepts and strategies. I didn't really know what that meant. So what we did as a team, and Annie Kay did most of the work on the movement and physical activity, and another couple of colleagues, Paula Parkin and Dot Giorgio, did a lot of work on these. But what we've done for every content descriptor, and I'll give you a couple of specific examples, every one of them, we have developed about 8 to 10 or 12 examples of what that could look like in your classroom as a learning outcome. When you get this, there is a link up there that you can go online and order them if you want. This isn't a plug, but it is a plug. If you're an HPE member, you get them for free. If you're not, you get them for $60 a piece. It's only $140 to become a member, so why don't you join and get them both as well. But so anyone who's online, if you don't know that, please, if you're a member, contact our office and we'll send them to you. So that's what we've done. We tried to make it a little bit easier. And the reason we did this, and I'll just use this one example, even though I have a 7-8 example as well, is level 3 and 4, one of the content descriptors is practice and apply movement concepts and strategies with and without equipment. And I've included, that's the link from the Australian curriculum, but it's similar with the Victorian, the wording's the same. When we looked at that, we didn't actually know what that meant. Or it means so many things. And I remember within a week of the curriculum coming out, a teacher sending me their rubrics that they had adjusted their rubrics from vowels and Ausvowels to the Victorian curriculum. And all they had done was put these statements in, and I said, what does it actually mean? When your kids are good at practice and applying movement concepts and strategies with and without equipment, what does that actually mean to you as a teacher? And they couldn't really answer that. So then we got example elaborations. And each of the content descriptions, as you would know, if you've looked at the curriculum, has examples. And some of these give a bit more of an idea of what they look like, but they still can be a little bit vague. Whereas what we tried to look at was, okay, the example elaboration, and they are just examples of what needs to be taught. What needs to be assessed against is practice and apply movement concepts and strategies with and without equipment. And I'm pretty sure if we workshop this in about 20 minutes, we could come up with about 40, 50, 60 different statements. What that could look like, would that be between all the different sports? We wouldn't be able to teach all of those, but we'd be able to teach some of them. So what we looked at is, what does this look like? Well, going back to the examples we've used, participating in physical activities as the elaboration, which require problem solving to achieve a goal, could become moving into space to receive a ball. A couple of examples I've used. Return to the centre court position after striking the ball in different racket sports. Striking the ball away from a player in a batting game. You can replace it, but something which you understand and which your kids understand and which your parents understand. And so we've looked at that for every elaboration in both the personal, social and community health and the movement and physical activity charts. Again, to me this just makes a little bit more sense than just saying, oh yeah, my kids, so Victorian curriculum writers, my kids are good at practicing and applying movement concepts and strategies with and without equipment. I bet you if you do that, a parent-teacher, they're going to go, what does that mean? Oh, it means that we're doing a bunch of games. We couldn't do them all, but we did a bunch of games, and your kid's really learning how to move into space in a range of games. Why didn't you ask him or her about it? If you're a grade 3 to 6 kid at Kalinda Primary School, you could tell your parents about that. Again, here's another example from level 7. Practice, apply and transfer. Obviously, I picked the same stream, transfer movement concepts and strategies. We've got some elaborations under it. It could mean that grades 7 and 8, the kids explain and demonstrate ways to create and defend space in invasion games, or they throw, kick, pass the ball into space in netball, basketball, AFL, football, whichever one. Understand the impact of ball placement in a striking racket. They can do and tell you about it. Develop a movement sequence in response to rhythm. Any one of those is probably a little bit easier to understand than selecting previously successful strategies and applying the most appropriate when solving new movement challenges. We just tried to put it in lay terms, and so these charts have those pretty well explained. If again, hopefully that makes sense to you. Linking to your planning, this is where we're close to the end. You're doing well, and what I would often do is ask you, this is where I'd start. What are your key program outcomes? When I work with teachers, generally they fall under 4 sort of categories. Some sort of skill, depending on the primary, they use move skills or sport skills, and game, sport and play. Something around health-related fitness, lifetime activity and knowledge, lifetime activity, and then stuff in the social and affective domain. And then I would ask, how's your program structured? Do you use it using a theme-based or multi-skill sport-based? So again, what I've tried to show is you could use either, but using a theme-based, just a simple way of structuring it. But equally important, and probably the most important question I ask, and it's sort of related to theme, but it's just related to curriculum design, which I think goes unnoticed in many. And I was first introduced to this concept before some of you were born, in 1983, when I started my PhD at Michigan State University. I got introduced to the concept of how much real teaching time do we have. And let's think about that we might say we're teaching, go back to the start of basketball unit for 5 weeks. And we go, we've got 5 weeks to teach basketball. And I sat in workshops where they go, yeah, I've got 5 weeks. Now, I changed it to volleyball. I was in a workshop at the end of last year with volleyball, and this teacher said, yep, I can teach in volleyball, I can teach the set, the bump, the spike, and a bit of gameplay, and they can play volleyball after 5 weeks. And I said, I want some of your magic. But we sometimes think that way, that we can teach that sport in 5 weeks, where if you're typical primary school, at best you would have an hour a week. In a high school, you might have 2-3 hours a week. So that means, and I want to really drill this one home, if you've got 15 hours for a unit, what I want us to think about is, in here and at home, how many of you have coached a team in a sport for a season? Okay? Think of the team you coached. It'd be really helpful if they were a school-age team, maybe grades 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay? And you might have 15 to 20 practice sessions. Would that be fair to say? You play 12. This is such an important concept to get for your planning. You might have 12, 14, 16 games. So the kids have 30 plus opportunities to practice those sports in a sports situation. Just like a PE class, you've got 25 kids. Or do you have in a netball class, netball team 10? In a soccer, you might have 13 or 14. Generally, you've got more kids who want to be there. You normally have a space that isn't going to be interrupted by the school assembly when you're coaching. We normally have better equipment ratios, and you've probably got a more homogeneous, that's a long word, more kids who are similar in skill level than the breadth you would have in a PE class. And I want you to think about, in a whole season like that, did your kids become experts at the sport you were teaching, or did they still need a couple more practice sessions? And the amount we've improved, we really need to think about, because I coached one team, one of my kids' teams, I coached for about 8 to 10 years. Or longer. At the end of that, there's some kids, they were okay, but they still didn't have soccer down pat. Others who did. And what we've got to think about, okay, in 5 weeks, what can we expect realistically to do? I might get more out of it if I reinforce some of what I do in the 5 weeks in football, in basketball, and reinforce some of that in water polo, if you do water polo, or reinforce that in another sport. I can actually get more double messaging. But it's really hard to, and that's okay. Then we can free ourselves from saying, actually, I can't teach the kids how to play netball, but boy, I can teach them how to move around space, and I can do a bit of passing and receiving. Can't teach them how to play tennis, the whole game, but I can get them to hit the ball over the net, and I get them to think about where they're going to hit it. Until they get technically sound, they may not be able to get it there, but they know where. So I just put this up, and let's think about the time we have. So if we look at grade 3, 4, an hour a week, across those 2 year levels, they might have 80 hours of PE time. If you are an awesome teacher, you might have 50% of your time, the kids are actually on task doing things. And then you might only spend half of that time on games and skills because you've still got other things to do. So you've got 20 hours. I'm just taking that, what can I teach in those 20 hours? At high school, it's a different degree of time. I just want you to leave you with that thought around how much time do you have. I know Laura's going to finish this off, but if you do want to contact me at HPE, our role is to serve the health and phys ed profession. Whether you're a pre-service teacher or a practicing teacher, if you do want to follow up, I'd really encourage you to, and would love to chat with you more about this or about other aspects of what you're doing in health and phys ed. Our role, it doesn't matter where you are in Victoria, our role there is to support you. We'd also encourage you to get on the tip of the week if you want to. Thank you. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks so much, Bernie. What I would ask, I have a little favour, and that is if you put into practice anything that you've learned today, that we are really keen to hear from you. So my email's up there as well as Bernie. So a photograph or a video or just some notes of how you've put this into practice, we'd really value. As Bernie said earlier, he has some sought-after prizes here for the best question. So we've only had one in the room so far.
And one online. If we get her if she emails us, we could get one sent out to her.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is they're still up for grabs. So does anyone have a question for Bernie that they'd like to share?
Yeah. Bernie, the question I have for you, I often reflect on the different schools I've been to, and what I find is schools have strengths in certain sports. One of the schools I worked at last year, the strength was soccer, football. And you could see both girls and boys out playing during recess, lunchtime. And I remember the head of PE said to me, whatever you do, don't teach them soccer, because they already know. And when I reflected on that, I thought, well, maybe I could use some of these strategies you're talking about, but apply it to soccer with a different ball and see if the kids are more receptive to the strategies by using a game that they already know.
Yep.
What do you think?
That makes sense. You can draw in, that might be the hook to get them in. Or maybe you say if you do this, you can finish with 10 minutes of soccer. But you know that they've got the concepts. You know that they've got potentially some of the skills. And so, yeah, you can draw on that and say, well, what about this sport is like soccer? Because you know that. Yeah, you just draw the similarities, you can hook them in with that. Excellent. Not quite as good as the first question, but yeah, excellent.
Any more questions? One online? Go for it.
Okay, so we've got another question from Margaret. I think she really wants the prize. Just curious, you mentioned that you were teaching theme-based concepts back in the late 1990s. Does that mean it went out of fashion until now and it's just coming back?
No, it sort of merged into some... It didn't get the run it should have got, I don't think. It's also morphed into, as a curriculum structure, some of how the game sense would, the game sense structure. But what I observed in working with a couple of people is some of the game sense didn't necessarily focus on combining the skills, because what we're doing is we're trying to look at the themes of the skills into the themes of the games. And there's a little bit of ignoring some of the skill base. And I was talking to Laura earlier about someone who I was at a presentation and they went straight from a 2 against 1. And this is someone who is teachers at the university level, went straight from a 2 against 1 to a 5 against 5 and missed the bits in between in their demonstration or in their application. And when asked about what if they can't do the 5 against 5, said, oh, just come out and do a couple of activities and jump back in. And so we started renaming this theme base so that we could actually separate the the pedagogy of teaching using a game sense approach to actually how you think about structuring your curriculum. So it's not that it's out, it's just that it hasn't got as much exposure. So if you read the book by Gallagher, you'll see a lot of exposure in the primary space of teaching through themes and theme concepts. If that answers.
I might just add to that, for practice to change in any subject, and HPE specifically, it takes generations for practice to change. And unless particular approaches such as theme-based approaches are supported across multiple levels, so you get exposed at uni with colleagues through professional learning, then change will never happen.
Yeah, and with that, I also think that the term Laura used there of exposure at university, I don't think universities now have as much opportunity as we used to drill down into some of these things. And
Monash University will do an excellent job.
No, they do. The universities do an excellent job within their constraints. And I'm not saying it's not the fault of the university. It's, like I said, we had these as 4 units in the first year and a half. So they had 4 full 24-hour units on these topics, so we could really drill down into depth. And that was only probably a quarter of the prac work that they did at that stage. And those of you who maybe look a little bit older, you might have had that many hours in your not you, I'm looking past you, you're 20, in your undergraduate. So I think it's a bit of both.
Thanks, Benny. Any more questions?
No worries. Thank you. Myself and Jess were sort of talking about how we've implemented the striking and catching, the invasion games. Now, with the theme based of, for say, catching, could then that be included in like a rubric for assessment as well, rather than just a focus in a class? So a pre and post test on catching in that different sports or over a number of sports.
I'd be looking at, good question. I'd be looking at, are the kids in those sports? I'd actually use the term receiving rather than catching, because generally in those sports they're moving and doing other things. But yeah, I'd be looking at developing a rubrics that could then apply across, if that's the question, across those different sports. And it doesn't matter which one use it. And I know teachers who have done that. Roxanne Bell, Roxanne, I can give you her contact. She does that in her school. It doesn't matter what sport they're playing, they take that rubrics in. And they've simplified it because there's some rubrics that will list, they might have, to be really good, you've got to be excellent at, and there's a couple of books with this, throwing, catching, and rebounding all at once. And none of them can do all of that. So you might isolate out just looking at receiving. And you might then say, to get a high score, they need to receive and control it. But a lower score, and there's a really good teacher who's worked with us, Sarah Maxwell, who does this, just because they respond and they know where they should go, they may not actually catch it correctly, they still get a positive score. And then you work on that. But yeah, once you've got a rubrics, you can transfer it. That also refers back, to the last part of the answer, is to what Glen Eagles did, is that's what they meant by consistency. They had rubrics developed. Mitch, you go into whatever sport activity, you're at the same school?
Yeah.
Jess, you go in, you've got the same rubrics, you've talked about it, but you're applying it with a different skills, different game set. Excellent question. Probably leading at the moment.
Mm-hmm. I can help you with that if you like.
Yeah.
Okay, off the back.
Pressure's on then for the last question, I suppose. So leading on from Game Sense and TGFU, where do you see the value of closed skill versus open skills at a, say, 7 to 10, where most kids will have their fundamental motor skills they're not too bad. They should be able to catch, they should be able to throw, they should be able to kick by year 7 and 8. Where do you see the value of closed environments over, or closed skilled environments over open skilled environments when you're teaching Game Sense or TGFU?
By that are you meaning a very controlled environment through to more open?
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at those 2 activities I gave. One's more closed, one's more open. Where are the kids logging in that system? But if you get to a point in that sequence, and that's just a sequence, and I've probably got, in a couple of weeks, I'll probably do about 15 activities joining those. But if you get to a point where the kids aren't successful, you've got to decide, do I want to keep them going being unsuccessful, or do I want to spend some time there being successful? Because you're right, you have some kids that probably can't catch and some kids that can. But what you're trying to do is get that balance between, okay, the kids that's thinking, okay, I've controlled it, and you're allowing enough time for them to make a decision about where to pass it, versus they're so overwhelmed by the catch and the pressure, they're never successful in it. So, yeah, apply that 1 out of 10 to 9 out of 10 and just keep moving it and understand, get a really good understanding, which you probably have if you're doing that 3v3, 3-3-3 of what constraints can I change? Can change the ball speed, ball type, change the game rules. So as you said, you've actually already told me, when you've got the 3-3-3, once they can do that, actually, no, we're going to make it no more steps in netball. So you're already doing that. But just judge your kid's success. But what I wouldn't want to see is a kid, Jess and I, just doing throw and catch, or a game where the kid never touches the ball because they're not successful, because we know that's going to turn them away. Still reckon you're winning.
We've got one more question online.
Okay, this one's from Jackson Bernie.
It's not Jackson Freeman, is it?
Hogan.
Oh, good.
No, not quite. Is 5 weeks, i.e. 5 hours, long enough to teach an invasion unit and concepts like moving into space? What sports tend to work best as a combination, etc.? Soccer, netball?
That's another good question, but how long's a piece of string? It sort of goes back to the open-close. If you've chosen to do 5 weeks of invasion game, you've then got to look at, okay, where are they up to conceptually? Are they able to move into space freely? If they can, do we start to then look at creating space as a second attacker? So one person moves to create space for someone else. So you're making the concept a little bit more difficult. And then you've got a measure of how much can I attain in those 5 weeks. And that's a bit of, I guess that's the skill of teaching with your group of kids. I'd also be looking at, in terms of combining, what are the interests of your kids, of activities they know and don't know. So the example over here, if they love soccer, well, maybe I do a little bit of it, and then what's a sport that's quite like that? I might combine that with hockey. So they're quite similar. I might do basketball and netball together because we're using the same space. And we can interact with that. But I could also introduce their chook ball. I could introduce 3v3 on that third of the netball court. I could introduce some moving in AFL, but just using a handball. So I think you just trial and error the sports. Because like I said, we did one unit there where we had cricket, cricket, badminton and tennis together. And someone wouldn't have thought, And I saw in that one, I'll finish with this one, hopefully that answers the question, one of the best teachable moments I've ever seen, where the PE teacher there, Steve Harvey, who was the PE teacher at the time, Steve, they were playing tennis, and how many of you have done hot shots or tennis, badminton, and wherever they pick the ball up from, that's where they start the next point. They don't go back into the game. They just start playing, because this teacher had multiple nets down the court. They pick it up, just start hitting from there. They got no chance of success. And we weren't doing cricket that day, but Steve just brought them in and said, okay, when we play cricket, how do we start each phase of play or each part? And he got them to answer, and they, after the ball gets hit or goes through the wicketkeeper, they all get back into position, the bowler walks back to the start of the mark, and they start the phase of play. He goes, in tennis and badminton, where should we start the phase of play? and the kids go, oh yeah, we should go get the ball, bring it back over to our court and start the phase of play on our court. So when we look at joining sports, I thought, what an awesome example. And I wouldn't have, that's now my example. But so in terms of combining, it really works for the teacher and the space and the equipment they have, interest of the kids. So I wouldn't want to lock it down and say, just do those sports together. Yeah.
Sorry, Benny. I was just going to add, if I may, one of the beauties of a themes-based approach is that instead of having 3 lots of 5 weeks on 3 different invasion sports, all of a sudden you've got 15 weeks when combined to really explore and extend student learning on different strategies and concepts that apply to a range or all invasion games. So for me, that's one point. And the second one is to think of the bigger picture. So even if you do only have 5 weeks of teaching invasion games, you've still got the rest of the levels to extend what they've learned in that unit.
Yeah. And you might divide those 15 weeks over 3 semesters, and we go back and what's the concept? Multiple exposures to the same concept. So, good.
Great stuff. Any more questions? Oh, one more. Oh, yes.
Hi, good evening all. Sorry I came a bit late.
That's okay, I did too.
I'm an early childhood teacher.
A what?
Early childhood teacher, kindergarten. Yep. I do sessional kinder. And university never told us how to do PE with the little ones, 4-year-olds. So, but I'm still very interested in see how I can introduce these concepts to children, but I have no idea on where to start, apart from, walking on tie ropes and pretending to be that sort of, throwing here, playing croquet in a small space. So, and that, thinking about the abilities. Where do I start? How do I do that?
I'll give you George Graham's reference, but you can start there with, let's get some balloons or large balls in there, just hitting the balloons into space. Okay. And the kids are catching them. Or you're trying to say, well, what does a round shape look like? Let's move in a round direction. Let's move in a zigzag. What's our personal space? Because if kids can move in personal space, then they can start to play games later on. Can they move safely around space without bumping into each other? Can they, some of those sorts of activities, get a set of scarves and the kids throw them up and catch them and then get something that's a little bit faster? So you're starting to introduce some of those concepts which will then be built upon by the Foundation 1-2 teacher, because you are looking at very, obviously kids who are very much in the early development stages of skills, but you can still do that one on jumping. Can they jump high, jump low? Can they jump and make a loud noise? Mm. Can you talk to them about, preps are pretty, or you ask them about the different animals they've seen at home or in the zoo. How do they move? Can you move like a crab? Can you move like a bear? Can you move around space? Who can make the loudest noise like a lion or a dog? And so you're starting to bring things in, but you're still getting them to think about and be creative. Have you got equipment you can get on and off? So they're on equipment and they jump down. So they start to introduce some of those basic concepts. But happy to share that with you too.
Yes, I would love to if you can, please. Thank
you. But the early childhood they get less than most.
Yes, on everything.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's a wrap. Is that it for online, Chantal? Okay, well, once again, thank you very much, Bernie.
Thank you for having us.
Coming and sharing your expertise.
Thanks.
Do we have a winner?
Oh, yeah. I need that woman online to send it through, but...
Margaret.
Which one do you want? You've got a movement, physical activity, personal, social, community health, but you need to get it.
Yeah, movement, physical activity.
Okay. And we've got to encourage our early childhood people who come here. Thanks. But if you want, these will make honestly, they'll make, I've had teachers use these who just write all their I can or learning intentions out of them. But thank you, and thanks for giving up your time this evening. I'm happy to chat if needed.
Thank you for coming, everyone. The next seminar will be in August, and it will focus on innovative approaches to assessment, and that will be on the Peninsula campus. Thank you.